our shirt on Teespring.
The story of immigration in the United States is a complex tapestry woven from threads of hope, struggle and resilience. It is a story often marred by discriminatory policies that have disproportionately impacted communities of color, leaving an indelible mark on the social, economic and political landscape of the nation. From the overt racism of the Jim Crow era to the more subtle forms of discrimination that persist today, immigrants of color have faced systemic barriers that have limited their opportunities and denied them their full rights as Americans. This essay delves into the history of immigration policies in the United States, examining their impact on communities of color from the 1930s to the Trump era. Through the lens of personal stories and historical analysis, we will uncover the human cost of these policies and emphasize the urgent need for a more just and equitable approach to immigration. The 1930s, a decade marked by the Great Depression, saw the rise of the New Deal, a series of programs and reforms championed by President Franklin D. Roosevelt aimed at providing economic relief and recovery. While the New Deal brought about significant progress in many areas, it also cast a long shadow of exclusion over communities of color. The Wagner Act of 1935, hailed as a landmark piece of legislation for its role in protecting workers' rights to organize and collectively bargain, contained provisions that inadvertently exacerbated racial inequality. The Act's exclusion of agricultural and domestic workers, occupations predominantly held by African Americans and Mexican Americans, effectively denied these groups the same labor protections afforded to other workers. This exclusion perpetuated existing power imbalances and contributed to the widening racial wealth gap that continues to plague the nation today. The discriminatory impact of government policies extended beyond labor laws to housing and infrastructure. The National Housing Act of 1934, while intended to make home ownership more accessible, led to the practice of redlining, where neighborhoods with predominantly black and minority residents were deemed hazardous for investment. This discriminatory practice resulted in a systematic denial of loans and mortgages to residents of these neighborhoods, effectively trapping them in cycles of poverty and disinvestment. The construction of the interstate highway system in the 1950s and 1960s, while touted as a modern marvel, further exacerbated racial segregation. Highways were often routed through thriving black and Latino neighborhoods, displacing residents, decimating businesses, and creating physical barriers that reinforced existing racial divides. The election of Donald Trump in 2016 ushered in an era of heightened anti-immigrant sentiment and policies that directly targeted communities of color. Trump's campaign rhetoric demonized immigrants, painting them as criminals and a threat to American values. This rhetoric translated into a series of executive orders and policy changes that sought to restrict legal immigration, increase deportations, and fortify the border with Mexico. The Muslim ban, one of Trump's first acts in office, barred entry to the United States for citizens from several Muslim-majority countries, stoking fear and discrimination against Muslim Americans. The administration's zero-tolerance policy at the southern border, implemented in 2018, resulted in the mass separation of migrant children from their parents, sparking outrage and condemnation both domestically and internationally. Children in cages, a stain on the nation's conscience. The images of children held in cages, separated from their families and subjected to inhumane conditions at the border, shocked the conscience of the nation and the world. These children, many fleeing violence and persecution in their home countries, were treated as criminals rather than asylum seekers deserving of protection. The trauma inflicted on these children, separated from their loved ones and subjected to such harsh conditions, will have lasting consequences on their physical, emotional, and mental well-being. The human cost of zero-tolerance families torn apart. The zero-tolerance policy was not just about border security, it was about sending a message of deterrence. It was about making an example of those who dared to seek a better life in the United States. But the true cost of this policy can be measured in the shattered lives of families torn apart, the tears of children who didn't understand why they were being taken from their parents, and the anguish of parents who were powerless to protect their children. The stories of these families are a stark reminder of the human cost of these policies. Echoes of the past, the long shadow of discriminatory policies. The Trump administration's immigration policies did not emerge in a vacuum. They are part of a long and troubling history of discriminatory policies targeting immigrants and communities of color. From the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 to the Bracero program, which exploited Mexican laborers, the United States has a long history of using immigration policies to exploit and exclude certain groups based on race, ethnicity, and national origin. This legacy of discrimination continues to shape the experiences of immigrants today, fueling fear, mistrust, and a sense of belonging. A call for justice. Reforming immigration for a more equitable future. The fight for immigration justice is a fight for human rights. It is a fight for the recognition that all people, regardless of where they were born or how they arrived in this country, deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. It is a fight for a future where the promise of America is not limited by one's immigration status or the color of their skin. Building bridges, not walls, embracing diversity, embracing humanity. The United States has always been a nation of immigrants. Our diversity is our strength, and our history is a testament to the contributions of immigrants from all walks of life. Instead of building walls and demonizing immigrants, we should be building bridges of understanding, compassion, and shared humanity. Conclusion. Towards a more inclusive future. As we move forward, we must acknowledge the harm inflicted by discriminatory immigration policies and commit to creating a more just and equitable system. We must recognize that immigrants are not a threat to our nation. They are an integral part of what makes America great. By embracing our shared humanity and working together to create a more inclusive society, we can ensure that the promise of America rings true for all.